Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 9th of July 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. The first article in today's newspaper appears in the form of an editorial on page number 6. The article is titled as The New Face. This article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recent reconstitution of the Council of Ministers by the Modi government. The Modi government has not only shuffled the cabinet, but the government has also created a new ministry in the form of the Ministry of Cooperation in order to give a boost to the cooperative sector in the Indian economy. See, the recent cabinet shuffle by the government has brought back into focus the concept of minimum government, maximum governance, which is one of the long pending reforms of the present government. In this regard, this particular aspect will become important directly from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Polity and Governance, particularly under the subsection of the structure, organization and functioning of the executive, ministries and departments of the government. As you can see, in previous year prelims, questions have been asked with respect to various aspects of the structure of government. For example, in prelims 2017, we had a question related to the cabinet form of government. In prelims 2014, a question about the cabinet secretariat. And in prelims 2015, a question on the parliamentary system of government. See, if you look at the topic of the structure, organization and functioning of the executive, this is more of a static topic in your GS paper 2. In order to comprehensively prepare for this particular part of your GS paper 2, one should go through the second ARC report on the structure of the government. This particular report has basically discussed various aspects of the structure of government, such as the creation of new ministries and departments, the creation of cabinet committees, which becomes quite important from the perspective of prelims examination. It has also discussed as to what are the present limitations in the structure of government and how these limitations have to be addressed. So as part of this particular video analysis, what we will do here is we will try to summarize the second ARC report on the structure of government so as to enable you to comprehensively prepare for these two sections in your GS paper 2. Now, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to write answers to these two main questions for the practice. The first question is, highlight the present challenges in the structure of government. Also examine as to how the structure has to be reinvented in order to meet the national goals and priorities. The second practice question is, the principle of subsidiary can reduce the burden of the center, empower the states and promote cooperative federalism. Elucidate. Apart from that, you should also be in a position to attempt these three prelims questions for the practice. So let us start with the basics of the structure of government, particularly with respect to the constitutional provisions as well as various rules dealing with the structure of government. Article 77 of the Indian Constitution provides that all the executive actions shall be expressed to be taken in the name of the President. Now we all know that the President of India, he is actually the nominal head. In reality, all the decisions are taken by the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. So it is the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister who would aid and advise the President in exercise of his functions. So whenever such decisions are taken, such decisions are not taken in the name of the Prime Minister, rather they are taken in the name of the President. Apart from that, under Article 77, President has been empowered to make rules for the convenient transaction of the business of the government. Hence, in pursuance of the powers vested with the President, under Article 77, the President has formulated two rules. One is Government of India Allocation of Business Rules, and the second one is the Government of India Transaction of Business Rules. As far as the Government of India Allocation of Business Rules is concerned, under these rules, we have basically two schedules, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. The first schedule of these rules basically includes a complete list of all the ministries, departments, secretariats and offices under the central government. The second schedule lays down as to what would be the roles and responsibilities of the individual ministries and departments. Now, for example, we have the Ministry of Ayush. Now, the name of the Ministry of Ayush has been provided under the first schedule. As far as what would be its role, what would be its responsibility, this has been mentioned under the second schedule. Now, for example, the role and responsibility of the Ministry of Ayush would be to promote the traditional medicines such as Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Homeopathy, and so on. Please do note that if any amendments have to be done to these rules, that means if a new ministry or department has to be created, or if we have to change the roles and responsibilities of the existing ministries and departments, then all such changes can take place based upon an order issued by the President. Now, recently the Modi government has made certain amendments to the Government of India allocation of business rules. The first amendment is the formation of Ministry of Cooperation. Now, if you look at the Ministry of Agriculture, under the Ministry of Agriculture, we had a separate department known as the Department of Agriculture, Farmers Welfare and Cooperation. So, this particular department of the Agriculture Ministry had the mandate to promote the cooperative sector in the Indian economy. Now, by creating a new ministry, we have taken away this particular mandate from the Agriculture Ministry and we have given this particular mandate to a new ministry. Apart from that, earlier we had the Department of Public Enterprises, which was functioning under the Ministry of Heavy Industries. Now, this particular department has now been transferred to the Ministry of Finance. Now, coming to the Government of India allocation of business rules, these rules have been laid down in order to promote interdepartmental and interministerial coordination. Now, presently we have almost around 50 ministries and departments. Hence, in order to promote coordination between these ministries and departments, what we have is the Government of India allocation of business rules. Under these rules, we have the first schedule, which basically incorporates the list of all the cabinet committees and their roles and responsibilities. Please do understand here that it is the Prime Minister who can add new committees, do away with the existing cabinet committees, or change the roles and responsibilities of the existing committees. So while in the case of ministry and department, the order has to be issued by the President, in the case of the cabinet committees, the order has to be issued by the Prime Minister. So if the Prime Minister issues an order to form a new cabinet committee, then a new cabinet committee can be formed. The Prime Minister can then decide even the composition of such cabinet committees as well. So as you can see, some of the cabinet committees which are presently set up by the Prime Minister have been shown on your screen. Some of these committees include the Cabinet Committee on Appointments, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, Parliamentary Affairs, Political Affairs, and so on. Now coming to the internal structure of a ministry, as you can see, each of the government ministry has a number of departments. Under each of the departments, we have wings. Under wings, we have divisions. Under divisions, the branches, and under branches, the sections. As you can see, the department is usually headed by the secretary, who normally happens to be an IAS officer. The wing is headed by a special secretary, additional secretary, or joint secretary. Division by a director or deputy secretary. Branch by an under secretary, and section by a section officer. So if you look at the basic attributes of government structure, first and foremost, there is horizontal as well as vertical division of work. When we say horizontal division of work, it basically means that the government's work as such has been divided into different ministries and departments. For example, we have Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Coal, and so on. And when we say vertical division of work, it means that in each of the ministry or department, work has been allocated at different levels. This ensures both technical expertise in the way we are doing the work, and it also ensures the functional specialization. The next one is hierarchy. So as you can see, the offices in the Government of India, they are arranged in the form of hierarchy. This basically ensures that the officers at the lower level are directly under the supervision and control of the officers of the higher level. This ensures the accountability to the higher officials, and hence reduces the discretionary powers of the officials at the lower level. Next one is strict adherence to rules and regulations. This ensures that whatever decisions are taken by the executives, these decisions have a certain level of consistency, stability, and uniformity. And lastly, in order to ensure that the work is carried out efficiently, we lay down qualifications for each and every job which is to be carried out. So if you have a look at the present structure of the government, it has both inherent strengths as well as weaknesses. In this regard, the second ARC has made a very beautiful statement. It says that over a period of time, the strengths of the government structure has got diluted, whereas the weaknesses associated with the government structure have become much more stronger. What do you think are the present strengths of the government structure? Please do let us know in the comments section. As far as weaknesses are concerned, I will be discussing this in the next slide. Now coming to the first challenge of rationalizing the functions of the government. See, presently, most of the central government ministries as well as departments, they are overburdened with their functions. And since they are overburdened, they are not being able to focus upon their core functions, which in turn has led to the neglect of national level goals as well as priorities. Even today, a large number of central government ministries as well as departments carry out those functions which can be efficiently carried out at the respective state government level. Even today, a large number of central government ministries as well as departments perform certain functions which can better be performed by the private sector. So, if we ask the central government ministries as well as departments to identify those functions and devolve the functions to the state governments or to the private sector, automatically we will be able to reduce the burden on the central government ministries as well as departments, and they will be able to focus upon their core activities. Now, for the sake of example, let's take the case of the Ministry of Railways. See, if you look at the present roles and responsibilities of the Ministry of Railways, it is involved in the planning of new railway routes, laying down of the railway tracks, design and manufacturing of locomotives, running of trains, and so on. So the nature of roles and responsibilities on the Ministry of Railways is quite huge. So in order to reduce the burden on the Ministry of Railways, we can identify some of these activities which can better be performed by the private sector. For example, laying down of the railway tracks, design and manufacturing of locomotives, the running of the trains by the private sector, etc. can substantially reduce the burden on the Ministry of Railways. For example, in recent years, we have introduced the private run trains known as the Tejas Express. So, by roping in the private sector participation, we can reduce the overall burden on the Ministry of Railways, and this will in turn enable the Ministry of Railways to focus upon its core activities. Now, what do we call this as? We call this as the principle of subsidiary. Now, what is the principle of subsidiary? Whatever roles and responsibilities are required to be carried out, these roles and responsibilities would have to be broken down into functions or activities, and we need to identify as to where a particular activity can be performed at the most efficient manner. If a particular activity can be better performed at the state government level, if a particular activity can be better performed at the private sector level, accordingly, such activity should have to be transferred to the concerned level, be it the state government or the private sector. This we call it as the principle of subsidiary. So second ARC has suggested that we need to apply this particular principle of subsidiary in order to reduce the burden on the central government ministries as well as departments. Let's take another example in order to understand about the principle of subsidiary. Now we have the Ministry of Education. Obviously, the Ministry of Education has got huge roles and responsibilities. One role of the Ministry of Education is about evaluating the educational outcomes in India. That is to evaluate the quality of education that we are imparting to the students. Now, this particular function can better be performed at a local level by a NGO, non-government organization, or a civil society organization. So, accordingly, this particular function can be delegated to a NGO or a civil society organization. So, when we say governance, governance basically means that the different stakeholders are basically coming together in order to promote growth as well as development. So it is not necessary that only the government should be part of the governance. Apart from government, even the private sector, as well as even the NGOs, civil society organizations, etc., would have to come together in order to promote growth and development. So when we say minimum government and maximum governance, it basically means that we are roping in more of private sector participation, more of participation by the NGOs, civil society organizations for the ultimate benefit of the human welfare. So as we can see, in case of governance, each and every stakeholder is able to contribute to the process of growth and development according to its own abilities, capabilities, as well as competencies. So we can say here that the principle of subsidiary is a tool in order to promote governance. It is basically a tool in order to encourage more of private sector participation, encourage more of participation by NGOs and civil society organizations. It is also a tool by which the central government can devolve or transfer its functions to the state government and thus promote cooperative federalism. In this regard, the second ARC has recommended that all the central government ministries as well as departments should carry out a detailed analysis of the functions which they are carrying out. They should do away with the functions which are no longer needed to be performed, and as far as the functions which can better be performed by the private sector or by the state government, these functions should be transferred to the appropriate level based upon the principle of subsidiary. Now coming to the second challenge of rationalizing the size of the government. See, in the year 1947, we had only around 16 Council of Ministers. But since then, there has been a drastic increase in the number of ministries as well as departments. So what could be the reasons for the increase in the number of ministries as well as departments? One, because of technological advancement and because of the need for specialization, we may have created new ministries and departments. Some of these include the Department of Space, Department of Atomic Energy, and so on. Secondly, new ministries and departments may have been created because of the compulsions of the coalition politics. That is, new ministries and departments may not actually be needed but may have been created by the previous government in order to accommodate the coalition partners. And thirdly, new ministries and departments may have been created in order to give due representation to the different sections of the Indian society. See, obviously, creating more number of ministries as well as departments has certain benefits. For example, we would be able to allocate separate finances for certain subjects which are considered to require technical expertise, such as say Department of Space, Department of Atomic Energy. It also promotes greater amount of specialization in government's work and so on. But at the same time, as highlighted by second ARC, creation of multiple ministries and departments has its own problems. The problem here is it will lead to lack of coordination and lack of integrated approach to the national level problems. Now, for example, let's have a look at the energy sector. Now, in case of energy sector, we have at least around 4 to 5 ministries and departments. We have Ministry of Power, Ministry of Coal, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Department of Atomic Energy, and so on. So as you can see, there are multiple ministries as well as departments dealing with a single subject of energy. So when we have multiple ministries and departments in a single subject, obviously this will lead to problem of coordination and lack of integrated approach. For example, we will not be able to have an integrated energy policy when we have so many ministries and departments dealing with a single subject. Similarly, in the transport sector, we have multiple ministries such as the Ministry of Railways, Ministry of Surface Transport and National Highways, Ministry of Shipping, Ports and Inland Waterways, Ministry of Civil Aviation, and so on. So this in turn leads to lack of integrated approach towards a transport policy. In contrast, if you look at countries such as UK, in UK, you have a single secretary who deals with the transport sector, a single secretary who deals with the energy sector. Whereas in case of India, we have at least around 4 to 5 ministers who deal with the transport sector and 4 to 5 ministers who deal with the energy sector. So this in turn creates a problem of coordination. So what should be the way forward according to second ARC? The second ARC has highlighted that on one hand, creation of separate ministries as well as departments would obviously promote functional specialization, but creation of large number of ministries and departments will hinder coordination. Hence, there is a need to balance between these two contrasting approaches. So in this regard, the second ARC has recommended that we need to identify those ministries and departments that are dealing with the closely related subjects. Now, all such ministries and departments should be placed under a coordinating minister. So for better understanding this, let us have a look at this particular screenshot. Now, in case of India, we have the departmental related standing committees of the parliament. Now, these departmental related standing committees have been set up in order to evaluate the demand for grants submitted by the various ministries as well as departments. Now, if you look at the way these departmental standing committees are set up, these departmental related committees are set up for a group of subjects which are closely linked to each other. Now, for example, you have a departmental related standing committee on social justice and empowerment. This evaluates the demand for grants submitted by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Minority Affairs, and so on. So what can be done here is, in order to promote coordination between these three ministries which deal with the welfare of the minorities, for all of these three ministries, we need to have a single minister for a coordination. So below the minister for coordination, each of these ministries will be headed by their own ministers. So according to second ARC, we just have to identify the subjects which are closely related to each other. Then all such ministries would have to be placed under a coordinating minister. Now the role of the coordinating minister, as the name suggests, to coordinate between these multiple ministries and departments and thus have an integrated policy. So as you can see, such a recommendation of second ARC would have a dual benefit. First and foremost, it will be able to provide due representation to the different sections of the Indian citizens on the Council of Ministers, and at the same time promote higher synergy and cooperation between the multiple ministries as well as departments. The third aspect is with respect to the transformation in the policy making. Now, if you look at the way the policy making is carried out in India, presently the policy making is considered to be quite ad hoc, reactive, and firefighting exercise. It means that we normally come out with the policies when problems have already arisen. That is, we react to the problems. So rather than being proactive, we just react to the problems. Now, one of the best examples of such a policy making can be seen with respect to land acquisition in case of India. Now, land acquisition is extremely critical in order to ensure the success of the manufacturing sector. But till the end of 2013, the Land Acquisition Act, which was in use in India, was the Land Acquisition Act of 1894. Only in the year 2013, we came up with a new Land Acquisition Act. So this clearly shows that the policy making in case of India is quite ad hoc as well as reactive. So in order to solve this particular problem, the second ARC has recommended that we need to transition from the policy making to policy planning. Now, what is policy planning? Policy planning means right now we would have to anticipate as to what kind of problems could arise in future. And even before these problems arise, we would have to come up with the policy responses, which means that the policy making in India, it should not be a firefighting exercise. Rather, it should more be of a fireproofing exercise. Now, for example, already we know that India is facing water stress. So why should we wait for another 15 to 20 years to come up with a policy for the efficient utilization of the water? Right now, we would have to identify that this is a future problem, and accordingly, we would have to come up with the policy responses in order to tackle the problem of the water stress. Apart from that, if you look at the countries such as New Zealand has created certain separate ministries whose main role is to advise the government. For example, the New Zealand government has set up a separate ministry to advise the government on defense related matters. Similarly, in case of India, we would have to create more number of think tanks in order to provide the necessary policy inputs to the government. Already we have Niti Aayog in the form of think tank. Apart from Niti Aayog, we need think tanks in other sectors as well. The next challenge is in terms of transforming the policy implementation. See, whenever we make policies in India, the policies look extremely good on paper. The problem arises in terms of their implementation. This problem arises because the implementation agencies do not have sufficient amount of autonomy. Moreover, these implementation agencies do not have sufficient amount of accountability to the government. In this regard, in order to better improve the policy implementation, the second ARC has recommended that we need to create independent and autonomous executive agencies for implementing the government policies. Apart from this, there should also be a change in the nature of accountability. For example, right now, most of the government agencies have more of internal accountability and less of external accountability. Internal accountability means they are more accountable to their own internal hierarchy. This has to get transformed to external accountability, wherein the executive agencies should be accountable to the people in the form of the citizen charters, social audit, citizen report cards, and so on. Secondly, right now most of the executive agencies are accountable for the process, that is for following rules and regulations. This process accountability has to be transformed to the performance based, where the executive agencies have to be accountable for their performance and not for following rules and regulations. And last is, the nature of accountability should also change from input to output. That is, the executive agency should be more accountable for the outcomes which they are able to achieve with the financial resources which they have been allocated to them. The last challenge is with respect to red tapeism and the problem of coordination. So as you can see in the internal structure of the ministry, whenever a file is submitted at the lowest level, this file passes through multiple levels until the time it reaches the top level, because of which there is huge amount of delay in the decision making process. In order to solve this particular problem, the second ARC has recommended that we need to reduce the number of levels through which the file passes, and ideally the file should not pass through more than 3 levels. So this will help us cut down on red tapeism and thus reduce the delays in the decision making. And nextly, in order to promote more of interdepartmental and interministerial coordination, we need to set up more institutional mechanisms. For example, we need to set up institutional mechanisms in the form of empowered group of ministers. Now, these empowered group of ministers can be set up in order to sort out the issues that may arise between the different ministries of the central government, or the issues that arise between the center and the states. Similarly, we need to set up the committee of secretaries in order to handle the administrative coordination between multiple ministries as well as departments. So these are some of the important recommendations given by the second ARC in order to reinvent the structure of the government. Now coming to the prelims based questions for the practice. Now most of the answers to these questions I have already discussed this as part of my discussion. So please go through these questions and let me know the answer in the comment section given below. In case if you want to find the explanation to these answers, you can try to attend the quiz on the ELEARN platform. With this, let us take up the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 10. The title of this particular article is Cabinet Extends the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund Loans to APMCs. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims Indian economy, particularly under the subsection of government schemes and initiatives. Now this particular article is quite important from the perspective of prelims because as you can see in prelims 2017, a question has been asked with respect to the National Agriculture Market Scheme, which is one of the initiatives taken by the government to improve the agriculture marketing infrastructure in India. So before discussing about the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund and the recent changes, let us first understand the background. See, over a period of time, there has been increase in the overall production of food grains as well as fruits and vegetables. However, in spite of increase in production, the overall prices received by the farmers has been quite lower. This is because of the poor agricultural marketing infrastructure. According to the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, that is the Dalwai panel, according to this particular committee, almost around 25 to 30% of the fruits and vegetables and around 8 to 10% of the food grains get wasted on an annual basis due to the poor agriculture marketing infrastructure. This is precisely because we do not have enough amount of collection centers, enough amount of cold chain infrastructure and so on. Hence, in this regard, in order to improve the agriculture marketing infrastructure, recently as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, the finance minister had announced 1 lakh crore worth agricultural infrastructure fund. Apart from that, the agricultural infrastructure fund becomes extremely important with respect to the newly passed Farm Act, that is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020. Now, various details of this particular act I have discussed this separately in the form of the analysis of the agricultural farm laws. So basically earlier, the farmers did not have the freedom to sell the agricultural produce wherever and to whomsoever they would want to. Now this kind of freedom has been given to the farmers through the recently passed Farm Act. Now the farmers have the freedom to sell their produce wherever and whomsoever they would want to. In particular, now the farmers can sell the agricultural produce outside the APMCs in a trade area. Trade area as defined under this particular act includes the farm gate, factory premises, warehouse and cold storage. So when a farmer is selling his agricultural produce in a trade area outside the APMC, the farmer is not required to pay the market fee. So when a farmer sells his agricultural produce in the APMC, he may be required to pay the market fee. However, when he sells the agricultural produce in a trade area outside the APMC, he is not required to pay the market fee. Now the farmer can sell his agricultural produce directly to a processor, exporter, trader as well as consumer. Earlier, if anyone had to buy the agricultural produce from a farmer, such a person was required to have a license. Particularly, he was required to have a license issued by a APMC. Now this requirement no longer exists. If a farmer is selling his agricultural produce outside the APMC in a trade area, and if someone wants to procure the agricultural commodities, that is, if a processor, exporter, trader or a consumer wants to procure these agricultural commodities, the only requirement right now is that of a PAN card. So now, since we have given the freedom to the farmer to sell his agricultural produce outside the APMCs in a trade area, which includes the farm gate, warehouses, cold storage, etc., the need to strengthen the agriculture marketing infrastructure becomes altogether more important. That is where the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund scheme comes into picture. Let us understand about the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund scheme and the recent changes. Now this is basically a central sector scheme. Being a central sector scheme, the entire funding as well as implementation will be carried out by the central government. The objective of this particular scheme is to provide for the medium to long-term loans worth rupees 1 lakh crore by the banks and financial institutions. These loans would be provided to certain eligible entities such as the primary agriculture cooperative societies, farmer producer organizations, agricultural entrepreneurs, startups. Earlier, the APMCs were not explicitly included as the eligible entities under this particular scheme. Now the Union government has decided to include APMCs as the eligible entities. That means going forward, even the APMCs can also avail the loans. Now these loans can be in turn be used in order to improve the agriculture marketing infrastructure such as the collection centers, storage, cold chain infrastructure and so on. As far as the benefits on these loans is concerned, first and foremost, the central government provides for an interest subvention of 3% per annum. Interest subvention here means interest subsidy. Now for example, let's say a particular farmer producer organization takes loan from a particular bank and the rate of interest which it is required to pay is 8%. Out of this 8% rate of interest, 3% rate of interest would be paid by the central government and the farmer producer organization would be required to pay only the remaining 5% rate of interest. Not just that, it also provides for the credit guarantee coverage under the Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for the micro and small enterprises. Now this particular fund is set up by SIRBI. So under this particular fund, whenever the micro and small enterprises takes loan from a bank, the loans are in turn guaranteed by SIRBI. Now this particular fund will also provide for a credit guarantee on the loans which have been taken in order to improve the agricultural marketing infrastructure. So this is what you should know with respect to the Agricultural Infrastructure Fund. Apart from that, as far as the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020, I have already discussed in detail about this particular act in a separate video which is available on the YouTube. So let us revise this particular act in a form of a prelims based MCQ. The question here is, with reference to the recently passed act, consider the following statements. The first one here is, under this act, the farmers have been given the freedom to sell their agricultural produce from the farm gates, factory premises, warehouses and APMCs without any payment of market fee. See, under this particular act, if the farmers are selling the agricultural produce from the farm gate, factory premises and warehouses, they are not required to pay the market fee. As far as the selling from the APMCs is concerned, it does not come under this particular act. And moreover, if they are selling from the APMCs, they may be required to pay the market fee. So the first statement which is given here is wrong. As far as statement number 2 and statement number 3 is correct, both these statements here are correct. The statement number 2 says that this particular act has provided for setting up of the price information and market intelligence system for the benefit of farmers. So this particular system would basically disseminate the price related information to the farmers. The third statement is the act bars the jurisdiction of civil courts in entertaining the disputes. In order to handle the disputes which may arise under this particular act, this act has provided for a dispute resolution mechanism. The dispute resolution mechanism is in a form of a conciliation board which is required to be set up by the subdivisional magistrate at the district level. So this act explicitly bars the jurisdiction of civil courts from inquiring into the disputes. So the third statement which is given here is also correct, and accordingly the right answer would be C, that is 2 and 3 only. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Tracking the Fugitives Everywhere. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 3 under the subsection of internal security. Now if you look at the fugitives in case of India, the fugitives can basically be categorized as the international fugitives and the domestic fugitives. The international fugitives are basically those criminals who may have committed crime in India, and after committing the crime, they may have escaped to other countries. On the other hand, the domestic fugitives or the domestic criminals are those criminals who may have committed crime in a particular state of India, and after committing the crime, they may have escaped or fled to another state. Now, in order to handle the international fugitives, we have a number of provisions. For example, we can declare the international fugitives under the Economic Offenders Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and so on. Similarly, we also have a separate wing of the Central Bureau of Investigation, which can issue the Interpol notices against these international fugitives. And once these international fugitives are located in other countries, they can be extradited back to India through the extradition treaties. Now presently India has signed the extradition treaties with almost around 40 countries. Similarly, in order to track the domestic fugitives, we have come up with basically two initiatives. One is the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network and Systems, and the second one is the National Intelligence Grid. With respect to the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network system, the basic objective of such a system is to connect all the police stations across India so as to maintain a database of the criminals as well as crimes. So by setting up of such a database, we can make the interstate investigation of various crimes quite easy. So if a particular person commits a crime in one state and if he flees to another state, all the details of such crimes will be uploaded onto this particular tracking system, and by such a tracking system, we will be able to track the domestic fugitives. Similar to that, we have the National Intelligence Grid. Now, this is basically an integrated grid which connects a database of almost around 13 core security agencies. Some of these security agencies include the National Investigation Agency, Intelligence Bureau, RAW, CBI, etc. Now, this particular article here basically highlights that we have a very strong institutional as well as legal framework in order to handle the international fugitives. However, the present institutional framework in order to handle the domestic fugitives is quite poor. This is on account of multiple reasons. First and foremost, the article has highlighted that most of the time it is the state police that deals with the domestic fugitives, whereas it is the central government agencies such as the CBI, RAW, IB, etc. that deals with the international fugitives. So the central government agencies have the necessary expertise to track down these international fugitives. However, the expertise of the police, that is the state police, to track the domestic fugitives is quite poor. This is because if you look at the state police is not only involved in law and order functions, but they are also involved in investigative functions. Now, if you look at the nature of skill set which is required for the law and order, this skill set is quite different from the nature of skill set which is required for carrying out the investigative related functions. So because they have not developed the necessary expertise, the state police are quite inefficient in tracking down the domestic fugitives. Secondly, see, in order to track the international fugitives, the CBI can issue the Interpol notices. Similar to that, we do not have a mechanism to issue the wanted persons notice across India. So going forward, we need to come up with such a mechanism wherein we should be able to issue the wanted persons notice similar to the Interpol notices which are issued to track the international fugitives. Thirdly, see, some of the countries such as USA have set up a dedicated units in order to track the interstate fugitives. However, in case of India, we do not have dedicated units to track the domestic fugitives. Accordingly, going forward, the article has recommended that we need to set up dedicated units to track down the domestic fugitives. So this is what you must understand from this particular article. As far as the importance of this particular article is concerned, you can incorporate points such as the crime and criminal tracking network system, national intelligence grid, etc. in your answers in order to highlight various steps taken by the government to crack down on the crimes. Similarly, you can also highlight various problems with respect to tracking of domestic fugitives in order to highlight the problems with respect to handling of criminals in India. With this, let us now take up the next article. So the next article appears in a form of an editorial on page number 6. The article is titled as a blip. See, July 1st, 2021 marks 4 years of completion of the goods and service tax. In this regard, this particular editorial here basically discusses the recent trends in the GST tax collection. This article highlights that prior to June 2021, the monthly GST collections had recorded more than 1 lakh crores for almost around 8 months consecutively. In fact, in the month of April 2021, the GST collections had increased to a record amount of 1.41 lakh crores. Consecutively, the finance minister had announced that the GST collection of more than 1 lakh crore may be the new normal. However, according to latest estimates, the GST collection for the month of June 2021 has dropped down to below 1 lakh crore. The monthly GST collection for the month of June 2021 is 93,000 crores. See, as far as this particular article is concerned, one should be aware about various aspects of GST, that is the recent trends in the GST collection, various aspects of the GST council, the controversy over the GST compensation cess. All of these aspects will become important from the perspective of the prelims examination. As far as mains examination is concerned, since GST has recently completed 4 years, one could expect a question related to the critical analysis of the GST regime. That is, to what extent the GST regime has been successful. Now, all of these aspects related to GST I have already discussed in much greater detail in the DNS dated 1st of May 2021. So those of you who have not watched this particular DNS, I would suggest you to watch this particular DNS in order to understand various aspects of GST. Now, as far as today's DNS is concerned, For today's DNS, this will be your prelims question for the practice. The question here is, which among the following best describes the concept of the reverse charge mechanism under the GST? Please try to find out as to what do you mean by the reverse charge mechanism under GST, and let me know the answer in the comment section given below. So the next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as "Should only the elected legislators be eligible for chief ministership?" See, various aspects of this particular article have already been covered by Faizan sir in our DNS dated 4th of July 2021. So since this particular article has already been covered, I will not be covering this article once again in today's DNS. However, as far as the content of the article which has appeared in today's newspaper is concerned, the content has been incorporated in the PDF for your reference. I hope you'd be able to go through the content and understand this article on your own. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. Now the answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option C.